have seen otherwise, and these things are not always that obvious. Getting data and joining it together from across the organization, as you can well imagine, sets us with a number of technical challenges. And this is one of the main things that Power Query can help you with. Again, I'm going to sort of demonstrate that. I think we'll all probably agree that we're experiencing what Microsoft are calling a data explosion, and we can all relate to that in some way. And you know, Microsoft recognized this probably about 5 years ago, that we were going to see this exponential growth in data. And thinking about only IT being able to handle that data and deliver the analytics was clearly not the right solution. So they started to develop a range of tools that allowed the users, the non-IT people and non-data analysts to be able to take responsibility for their own data analytical needs. And from that came the term self-service BI. So I hope that's sort of giving you a little bit of a rundown and a bit of a background. So this I hope is really explains the landscape of this self-service BI. And Power Query, as you can see, sits here. And for those of you who are familiar with the term ETL, which is extract, transform, and load, Power Query, that's what Power Query does. It extracts data from various sources. So you can see on this slide here, we've got different sources here. So it may be an on-premise server, cloud server, Excel files, CSV files, Access database. It may be the web. It could be a multitude of others as well. So Power Query can connect to all of these source data. And then once it's connected to it, it can perform various types of transformation. And it's the transformation that I'm going to show you exactly how that works. But transformation really is about putting the data into the right shape. It has to be in the right shape for us to be able to analyze it and model it. Problem is that invariably when we're given some data to work with, it isn't in the right shape, and we have to almost roll our sleeves up and to start cutting it around and copying and pasting and things like that. And that's really not a very good solution when we're trying to do some robust data analytics. So once Power Query has connected and pulled the data out of these various sources and it's done its transformation, you could then see that we would then push the data in this Power Pivot data modeling tool. We will be running another webinar to explain what Power Pivot is and how that works. But once this is in here, we can then start to output this data into various types of information. So here we've got a tabular report, and this is a Power Pivot table. And a number of people I've heard said, you know, Power Pivot is a bit like an ordinary pivot table but on speed, and I think that's probably quite a good analogy. Or we can export the data to dashboards and show visual representations of the data. So where do you find Power Query? Well, I said to you, Power Query has been around for some time. In fact, it was first available in Excel 2010, but it was a download. So you had to go and download it from the Microsoft site, and that was exactly the same for 2013. But for 2016, it came as a native part of the functionality. So as you can see on the top here, Power Query as a menu option. Sometimes you might have to go into add-ins and activate it, so you might not, even when you install it, you might still have to activate it. But for Power Query in 2016 is here. So you have a data tab, and here is the new query. And Power Query, as its name suggests, queries data in the underlying data source. So in 2016, it doesn't really refer to it as Power Query, it refers to it as just new query. So no questions, which is okay, so let me move on. One of the things in data analytics is about creating lists. And here's a really good example of a list. This is a nice clean list. It's normalized, it's in nice clean rows, nice clean columns. And if every data source that we were provided looked like this, then we'd make our lives completely and significantly easier. But I guess that's never going to happen. And I think there are some numbers out there that says we spend about 80% of our time as analysts or people that work with data actually getting the data into the right shape. So if we can have tools that help us to reduce that 80% down, then I think all of us would welcome that with open arms. And this is really what Power Query is going to be able to do for you. So let's just refresh our memories here. So in this table here, each row represents a single record. A record could be the details of an employee. It could be the record of a customer in a CRM system. It could be the record of a transaction. It doesn't really matter what it is, but one row represents one record. And of course, each column represents a particular type of data. So in this case, data about the product, category, and so on and so forth. The other thing I want to sort of introduce you to, I'm sure you're all familiar with the term translating data into information. And if we look at that, what that means, so if we take this table at the top, which we just looked at, that is what we would say is data. And just looking at the data in that format, it doesn't really tell us a great deal. You can make conclusions from it, I suppose, but in essence you can't really make any decisions based on that. But when that data then is reorganized, it then becomes information. As you can see underneath there, we have a pivot table. So we've taken data and we've reorganized it, reshaped it, and we've made that now into information. And that sort of information now will enable you to make decisions about your business, and that's an important thing to keep in your mind, this data and information. But I also want to talk to you and show you, there are opportunities for us to turn information back into data and then re-engineer data so we can actually create a different type of information. So this is our first example. So looking at the top table, you probably all recognize this. This typically is a layout you would see in sort of financial reporting. So you've got product ID, product name, and then underneath the month headers you can see values. These might be sales values. Looking at that, that's really not in a good shape for us to actually do very much analytics with it. And the reason for that is that the data has already been pivoted. It's been pivoted underneath the month names at the top. So what we want to do, if we look at the after box, we want to turn that before table into the after table. So now we've got a separate line for each product for each month. So as you can see, the product ID repeats itself down, as does the product name, but we've now got the individual months and the individual values for each of those months. So that's our challenge. How do we take the before and create the after from it? Well, so this is going to be our first challenge. So I'm just going to drop out of here. So when we're using Power, 5% of the time, we will open a new Excel worksheet. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect to the table that we want to transform. So as you can see, I'm using Excel 2016 here, so I'm going to go to Data, and there is the new query tab. I'm going to click on that, and here, as you can see, various types of systems and data that you can connect to. For this example, I'm going to connect to an Excel workbook. So I'm going to click on that, and it's now saying to me, okay, so where is the workbook? So it's exercise 1. So it's creating a connection now from this brand new workbook that I've established to the underpinning data file. It's saying which sheet do I want to connect to. So in an Excel spreadsheet, worksheet, you could have multiple worksheets down here, but in this one there's only one. So if I click on that, it's now going to give me a preview of what that data is looking like. And as you can see, that looks very much like it did in the slide that I presented to you at the beginning. So I'm going to click to edit it, and there is that data. So the object of this exercise, just to remind you, is we need to take all of these months' financials and unpivot them so they have a line of their own. I was talking to a colleague a few weeks ago who said, before he knew about this, he spent 3 hours writing some pretty complicated script to do that. He was quite annoyed when I showed him how easy it is to do. So here what we'll do is if we highlight the first column and highlight our last column, then there's a header here of transform. As you can see, there's lots of different transformation actions. The one I'm interested in, this unpivot columns. There we go. So in one file swoop, I have unpivoted all of those rows, and I have now got a really nice table where each row represents each month and has a sterling value in it. Now, I want to just bring your attention to something that's happening over here. And as you can see under this applied steps, one of the really clever things in Power Query is whenever you perform a transformation step, Power Query records that step. I guess you could say it's a bit like a macro. So as you can see here, these are all of the changes that were made to this data. So why do we need the steps? Well, I would say 2 reasons. One is, if I made a mistake when I've unpivoted that column, I can actually just remove that step and go back to where I was before. And then if I need to do something different, then I can. And then I can just reapply it. So let's go back into here, unpivot. The second reason why it records these steps is, let's say that the underpinning source file gets updated on a weekly basis. Well, all you need to do is overwrite the original source file, come back into Power Query and refresh it, and then it will run these scripts here, and it will transform the data and provide it to you as a finished job. So setting up these transformation actions should really be a once-only task. So this is called sales. I'm going to call this transform 1, and I'm going to save this. So now you can see here, it's created a table in Excel with the data in exactly the format that I want it to be in. So I'm just going to save this and close that. So you can see there, that's what we started with and that's what we ended up with. So any questions? No questions so far. Okay, so our second example, again, the before and after. If we look at the one before, you can tell that someone's created this in Excel and their intentions were probably to email this around to their colleagues. It's just in that sort of format because there's not a great deal more you can do with it in that format. But from a data analysis point of view, actually there's quite a bit we can do with it using Power Query. So again, look at the after box, and we want to translate that into each row having a unique record. Now, I said at the beginning about turning information back into data, and I'm going to give you a good example of how that works. Okay, same thing applies. I've opened up a fresh Excel workbook, data, new query, file again, and I'm going to find that file. This time it's on sheet 1, and as you can see, this is what it actually looks like. I'm going to edit that, and there you go, you can see the report in its original format. So let's have a look at what we need to do with this. Well, one of the things I need to do is I actually need to move this column here over here. I can't just grab it and move it across. I have to create a new column. So I have the facility here to add a new column. So I'm going to create a new column. It's going to be called county name. And down here you can see the headers. So all of these headers here are represented here. I want the new column to use the county column that already exists. So I can insert that in there and then go OK. So there's my new column now, which is based on this column here. But I want to get rid of this, and so I can go into here, and I want to remove that column. Now those Excel users amongst you are thinking, well, if you remove that column, then the new column that you've created is going to go to pot. Well, it's not. So there you go. It has removed the column, but it has kept the column in background so as to allow me to keep that new column working. So the next thing I want to do is, if I look at first name, there's quite a lot of null values in here. So I'm going to uncheck null. I don't want any null values in there. That's great. And what you can also see here is these are the headers that came from the source file. So I don't want those either. So I'll filter first name header out. And there we go, that's filtered that out. So all that remains then is I need to complete these rows here. So I can highlight that and go back into transform, and there's a really nice little routine. It says fill and fill down, and there you go. So I have now taken that report, which was nowhere near in a position for us to do some data analysis on it, and now actually got it into a really nice clean shape for us to analyze that. So I'm going to save this. Transform 2. Okay, so as you can see, that looks a lot different from how it first started out. So this is a good example of the turning information back into data. That's exactly what I've just done. I've taken a report, which is information, and I've turned it back into raw data. So what I could do now, if I wanted to, I could use this new data. I can create a pivot table, and I could do all sorts of things with the pivot table. So as an example, I could go 30 rows. We could do, what else have we got here? County names on here. And we could have salaries down here, and so on and so forth. So, you know, I've been able to reshape that into a new pivot table, and this is not a fixed report, it's a dynamic report. So I hope that gives you a really quick idea of how to change something which was flat and really not in a very friendly state, but into something that actually we can do quite a bit with that. Okay. Now, an important point to say here, now I've talked about opening a new Excel spreadsheet when you're doing this. And the reason for that is we don't want to change the underlying source file, because if we do that, then we might be scuppered if something goes wrong. So by opening a new worksheet and linking to it, we only change the data or retransform the data in the new file. We don't make any changes to this file here. And that's what I would really keep that in mind. It's pretty dangerous to start changing this one. Okay. So my third example takes this a bit further, and I bet most of you can probably relate to having to do something like this. Let's say you get weekly sales figures as a CSV file or an Excel file. So week 1 through to week 4 and so on and so forth. And you need to analyze these every week. And you may be at the moment having to cut and paste, and that's a real pain. And it's something that really is not very efficient and not very productive. One of the real cool features of Power Query is we can put all of these Excel files into a folder, and Excel then will go to that folder and will actually interrogate each file, and in essence will join all of those together and aggregate the data automatically. It's very, very cool. So when week 5 sales come along, all you need to do is grab week 5, drop it in this folder, refresh, and it will do all of the work for you. In this example, I'm then going to take that a stage further. I'm going to take the combination of these files and I'm going to join them into an Access database. And once I've done that, I'm then in a position to load all of that into my data model. Now, I have done some work in advance in good old Blue Peter style here. Because this is a little bit more involved, so I didn't really want to take too much time in doing sort of that work. So where are we? Data transfer. So, as I say, I've already done some work on here, and what I did was I put all of those Excel files into a folder. They all have to be, of course, of the same format, otherwise that's a real problem for us. And I've actually been able to then pull all of those files in together in their new aggregated form. So what you would do is you would go to Data, New Query, File, but this time you would go to From Folder. And you would browse to the folder, wherever the folder was that had those Excel spreadsheets in it. And once you've done that, then Excel will do most of the rest. So let's have a look at then, once now I've got to this stage, so I hope you can see this. This is a query which is linked to those four Excel spreadsheets. And there's 3,712 rows in total of all of those from those files. So I'm going to edit this query. So what you're looking at now are the values of those 4 spreadsheets. One of the things you notice here is I've got a bit of a problem because it's not actually put the headers into the right place. Well, that's not a problem. I can use one of the transformation routines here, which is use first row as headers. I click that, and there we go. That's sorted that out. When you are doing data transformation, one thing is really important is to get rid of data that you are never going to need for the particular exercise. So in here, I would remove that column, and I would remove that column because they're not going to be of any use to me. I am going to set this as a date because, okay, and everything else looks fine. So I'm just going to save this now as Excel files again. It's refreshing it, and you notice that it's come up with some errors. So errors are likely to be some spurious characters in the underpinning data. So there's a number of things you can do with errors, but very quick and dirty, you can actually go in and set to remove errors. So if I refresh that, the errors have gone. So I now need to go to the Access. So this time it's from a database. It's a Microsoft Access database. And it is here. So I'm connecting to Access. These are all the tables within this Access file that I'm looking at. I'm interested in the customer service calls here. I'm going to edit this, and in the same way as it did with the with the Excel files, it's showing me the values that are in that table. They all look pretty straightforward. I need to change this. I don't want date and time. I just want a date. I don't want that, and I don't want that. Okay. So now I'm going to save this query as Access Files. So you can see here now, I've pulled 3,680 rows in from the Access database. I've got 3,707 rows from Excel. So the last thing I've got to do is to put those together. I'm going to click on the Excel. I'm going to put the Excel data into the Access data. So Edit. And we've got this Append Query option. So if I drop this down, I want to append the Excel files into the Access database. If I save that, what you should see now, here we go, is 7,387 rows in that Access database. So if you think about what we've done here, we've taken a number of Excel files, we've pulled them into Power Query, we've done some transformation on them, and we've joined them together. We've connected to an Access database, we've done some transformation, and we've joined the Excel files together. I now have this query here which is ready to start to doing some analytics on. If you try to do that manually, I've got to say that would take you quite a significant amount of time. Okay, so I think we're that's the end of the demonstrations. I'll say please ask some questions. I hope that you've all in some way been able to relate to the sort of things that I've done here. So with Power Query, you can connect to a wide variety of disparate data sources. And those sources can be separate files like Access or Excel. They can be on-site servers, that SQL Server might be, analysis services, or you can connect to a server in the cloud, so Azure might be an example. You can combine and transform data of many different data types. And very importantly, record the transformation steps so automated updates can be applied. So go back to that and that exercise I did where you get a weekly file update every Friday, let's say, and you've got to join that into something else, and if you're at the moment copy and pasting, this will save you a significant amount of time without doubt. And the scripts that I showed you, you can actually share those scripts with your colleagues, and there's a central repository in Excel to 2016, where you can share the script. You don't share the data, but you share the script with your colleagues. So if a colleague of yours works on the same data, they can actually take the same script as you've done and actually use that without them having to reinvent the wheel. And lastly, we can also turn information back into data and then re-engineer that data back into information. And I think they're really powerful routines, and the sort of things that you probably do on a daily basis. This is a Power Pivot report, pretty straightforward, but being able to take all of these disparate data sources and push it into a report like this, it gives you the opportunity to chop and chase and to do something different with it, I think is unbelievably powerful. We're not touching on this today, but we will run another webinar on this. Microsoft have a product called Power BI. I know it's really confusing, the terminology, because they all sound very similar. But Microsoft Power BI is a cloud-based analytical tool mainly designed for dashboarding, and it is a beautiful tool that allows you to create a wide range of very dynamic, interactive dashboards with graphical interfaces, and also it makes it very, very easy to share information with your colleagues. So if you created a dashboard and you want your colleagues to be able to use it, it's a breeze to do that for them to just log in and to use that dashboard. Well folks, it's getting close now. It's sort of 37 minutes we've been going. We said it'd be 40 minutes. I'm just going to look to see whether we've got any questions. Just bear with me a second. Okay, so Peter asked a question. Can it be shown into a graphical format? Okay, Peter, I hope I've answered that for you. There is another tool, which is Power View, which is part of the Excel product. It's nowhere near as powerful as the Power BI product, but the downside with Power View is it runs in Silverlight, and Microsoft have really not made any long-term commitments to Silverlight. So I think we're going to see Silverlight in Excel be replaced probably by HTML5, and that's what the Power BI product is built on. The other thing that I'm not really having time today, but Excel and Power BI have very, very tight integration. So you can push information from Excel into Power BI and create dashboards from it. And you can export data models from the Power BI dashboarding tool back into Excel to do some form of tabular data analysis. Okay, Ben, so is there anything you want to add to that to sort of finish off today's webinar?
Yeah, so really interesting stuff, that Martin. I know from my own experience of doing development work, especially in Access and Excel, those transform options you've shown are, very good and can save an awful lot of time in terms of, what you've got to build from scratch. I mean, do you know what? Sounds daft. I've got a question for you. When you are pulling all of the data in from multiple Excel files, so you use the idea of it being sort of, lots of sales reports and different things per week. If more Excel files will go into that, would it pick that up automatically as well, provided they're all in the same format?
Yeah, when you so when you drop the various files into the folder and you do connecting Power Query to the folder, it will know the file types that are in there. So so your weekly report might be called weekly report as an example. So as long as they are all of the same format, then it will pick that up. What will really screw it is if you try and put an Excel file in there which is none of the same format, then you're going to get some errors. But as long as each file is of the same format, then it will know what to do with it.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, I know from personal experience that saves a lot of effort. No, it's really good. So, look, everyone, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate your time. There will be more webinars on this subject area, and we do appreciate it's not, as Martyn said, a new area of Excel. It's been around for a while, but the thing we've got is sort of making people aware of what's possible, sort of expanding those boundaries of what you can do within Excel. And this is one of those little pushes against that imaginary line around what's possible. So, hopefully we'll see you on another webinar. As we said at the start, we will send you a one-sheet.
Ben, sorry, before you go, I've just got a question here from Chris, which I'd like to pick up.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah, so Chris is saying, touching on Ben's, so when using multiple Excel spreadsheets within a folder, would it not make more sense to use one Excel file across multiple worksheets? You could do that. It depends on how the data is sent to you. So if you don't have any choice about the format of the data that's been sent to you, then if you don't have any, so then you may have less choice. The thing with the Power Query, you could do it both ways. I think it's probably easier just to keep dropping the files into the folder and letting Power Query do the connection and the amalgamation and the reaggregation itself. Okay, Ben, sorry.
No, it's a really good question from Chris. Is it possible to pull it from separate sheets within the one workbook if it's in the same format, or do they have to be separate files?
It's going to be, I think there are going to be some restrictions. So if it's looking for, you really ideally want one worksheet in each workbook. I don't think you're going to be able, so if the workbook's got 3 or 4 worksheets, I think it's only going to pick it up from one of those worksheets.
Right.
So that's why it's much better to resort to the individual files rather than trying to use one file with multiple worksheets. So
perhaps maybe that might be something they bring out in the future, eh? Who knows?
Who knows?
Brilliant. Okay, so look, thank you all very much for attending. Thank you, Martyn, for your time presenting this to us. This is a bit of a more of a journey ahead of us because it's new to most people. But hopefully you'll take that journey with us and attend more webinars on Power Query, Power BI, Power Pivot, which I'm sure Martyn's looking forward to deliver. And hope you all have a really good day, and we'll send those cheat sheets along with that video. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.